She left me after a girls' trip and returned with baby. I made her regret it. When I married my wife, I thought I had everything I could ever want. We had been together for 4 solid years, and for all of that time, everything felt right. We had plans for a future, a family, and a life built on what I believed was trust. She always talked about having kids. It was one of the things we bonded over most. Late-night conversations about baby names, nursery colors, and the little gadgets we'd buy for our future children became our shared dream. I was excited to start that chapter with her, to build the family we both wanted so much. But life doesn't always stick to the script. After months of trying to conceive, we finally went to a doctor to figure out what was going on. The news hit like a freight train. The issue was with me. My count was low, so low that having kids naturally was practically impossible. Hearing that felt like a punch to the gut. Everything we'd planned for suddenly felt out of reach, and I couldn't help but feel like I'd let her down. At first, she was supportive, or at least, she seemed to be. She told me it didn't matter, and that we'd figure it out together. But looking back, her reaction felt off. It wasn't just the way she said it. It was the way she seemed to drop the subject entirely, as if having kids had never been important to her in the first place. I tried to chalk it up to her trying to comfort me, but as the months went by, her attitude shifted. She became distant, cold even. The woman who used to light up when talking about our future now avoided the topic altogether. And then there were the small jabs, comments about how I wasn't taking care of myself, or how I wasn't as ambitious as I used to be. They were subtle, but they stung. When I confronted her, she brushed me off, saying I was being overly sensitive. But deep down, I knew something had changed. Despite the growing distance, I held on, hoping things would get better. I suggested other options, adoption, surrogacy, but she shut them all down. "I'm happy as long as we're together," she'd say. But I wasn't convinced. I tried to be the best husband I could, thinking maybe I could fix whatever was wrong. But over time, our relationship devolved into something unrecognizable. We weren't partners anymore. We were roommates, just going through the motions. Then one day, out of the blue, she told me she wanted to go on a girls' trip. It wasn't unusual. She'd gone on trips with her friends before, and I'd always supported her. This time, she said she wanted to go to America, a destination she'd been talking about for a while. I didn't think twice about it. I even helped her pack, making sure she had everything she needed. The last thing she said to me before leaving was, "Thank you for being so supportive." It felt odd, but I brushed it off as her just being appreciative. That night, I stayed up late so I could call her once she landed. I wanted to make sure everything went smoothly, but when her flight landed, she didn't answer my call. I figured she was tired and went straight to her hotel. But when morning came and I still hadn't heard from her, the worry started creeping in. I called her friends, the ones she was supposedly on the trip with, but they were just as confused as I was. "We're not on a trip," one of them said. "We're at home. We haven't seen her." That's when it hit me. She wasn't on a girls' trip. She wasn't with her friends. She hadn't gone anywhere with anyone. She was just gone. When I realized she hadn't gone on a girls' trip, panic set in. I called her phone dozens of times, each one going straight to voicemail. I checked with her family, her friends, anyone who might know where she was, but no one had any answers. It was like she had vanished into thin air. At first, I thought something terrible had happened. An accident, maybe. I filed a missing person report and spent sleepless nights scouring social media, news updates, and any lead I could find. Weeks passed, and there was no word from her. The police couldn't do much, given that she was an adult who had seemingly left of her own accord. Friends and family stopped asking questions, offering only awkward looks and vague condolences when I brought her up. Then, one day, I got a message. It was a simple email from her. "I need time to figure things out. Don't look for me." That was it. No explanation, no apology, just a cold, detached request to leave her alone. I was devastated. The woman I had loved and trusted, the person I thought I would spend the rest of my life with, had abandoned me without a second thought. The worst part wasn't even the loneliness. It was the uncertainty. What had I done wrong? Why hadn't she talked to me before leaving? Did she ever plan on coming back? I replayed every moment of our relationship, trying to find the cracks I must have missed. Was it the infertility diagnosis? The distance that had grown between us? Or had I just been blind to who she really was? Her family was no help. They seemed just as shocked as I was, but their silence spoke volumes. I had a nagging suspicion they knew more than they were letting on, but I didn't have the energy to push. Months turned into a year, and life became a monotonous routine. I went to work, came home, ate dinner alone, and fell asleep on the couch more often than not. Therapy became my lifeline. My therapist helped me unpack the layers of guilt, anger, and betrayal that consumed me. The more I processed, the more I realized how one-sided our marriage had been. I had always been the giver, the one making sacrifices and compromises while she quietly took what she needed without giving back. Over time, the pain dulled. I stopped checking my email obsessively, hoping for another message from her. I deleted our photos, packed away her belongings, and gradually began to reclaim my life. But even as I moved forward, questions lingered. Where had she gone? Why had she left? And most importantly, why couldn't I let go of the part of me that still wanted answers? Little did I know, the answers were coming, just not in the way I expected. After a year of silence, I finally started to pick up the pieces of my life. Her disappearance had left a gaping hole, but slowly, I began to fill it with new routines and small victories. Work became my escape. I threw myself into projects, staying late to avoid coming home to an empty house. My boss noticed the extra effort and rewarded me with a promotion. It wasn't just about the title. It was about feeling capable again, like I had control over at least one part of my life. Outside of work, I found solace in therapy. My therapist helped me unpack the weight of her betrayal, the years of emotional distance, and the guilt I had carried since the infertility diagnosis. "You didn't fail her," my therapist reminded me during one particularly raw session. "She made a choice to leave. That's on her, not you." Those words stuck with me. For so long, I had internalized her leaving as a reflection of my worth. But now, I was starting to see it for what it was, a reflection of her character. I also reconnected with old friends. For years, my marriage had consumed my time and energy, leaving little room for anything else. Now, I had the freedom to rebuild those relationships. My friends became my support system, reminding me of who I was before her and pushing me to rediscover my passions. I started going to the gym, not out of anger or revenge, but to feel better in my own skin. The physical transformation was a bonus, but the real change was in how I saw myself. For the first time in years, I felt confident, strong, even. Then, there was the house. It had been ours, but after she left, it felt like a tomb of memories I couldn't escape. One day, I decided I couldn't live like that anymore. I repainted the walls, swapped out the furniture, and turned the guest room into a home office. Bit by bit, the house became mine again, a reflection of the person I was becoming instead of a reminder of the person who had left. By the second year, I felt like I was finally moving forward. The pain was still there, lingering in the background, but it no longer controlled me. I stopped wondering if she would come back and started focusing on the life I was building without her. But just when I thought I was free of her shadow, she came back, bringing with her more questions than answers. It had been 2 years since my wife disappeared, and by then, I had stopped expecting answers. I had moved on, or so I thought. Then, out of nowhere, she came back. It started with a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I opened it cautiously, only to find her standing there. She looked different, not drastically, but enough for me to notice. Her hair was shorter, her face slightly fuller, and in her arms was a baby. I stared at her, my mind struggling to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. "Hi," she said softly, as if we'd just seen each other last week. "Can we talk?" My first instinct was to slam the door in her face, but curiosity, and maybe a bit of unresolved anger, kept me from doing it. I stepped aside and let her in, my eyes darting to the baby she was holding. We sat in the living room, the air thick with tension. I didn't offer her anything to drink or ask how she'd been. I just waited for her to explain herself. "I know I owe you an explanation," she began, her voice shaky. "You think?" I replied, unable to keep the sarcasm out of my tone. She looked down at the baby, who was squirming in her arms, and took a deep breath. "I wasn't honest with you before I left," she admitted. That was the understatement of the year. She went on to explain that she had felt trapped in our marriage after the infertility diagnosis. She said she had always wanted to be a mother, and that the thought of never having kids had broken her. "So you just left?" I asked, my voice rising. Without a word, without giving me a chance to talk about it. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't know how to handle it," she said, "and then I met someone." Those 4 words hit me like a punch to the gut. She told me she had met a man while on one of her so-called girls' trips and had started an affair. When she found out she was pregnant, she panicked and decided to leave, cutting ties with everyone in her life, including me. "Why are you here now?" I asked, struggling to keep my composure. "What do you want from me?" She hesitated before answering. "I made a mistake," she said. "He's not in the picture anymore." I thought, maybe we could try again. I stared at her in disbelief. "You thought we could just pick up where we left off? After everything you've done?" Her tears spilled over, and she reached out, placing a hand on my arm. "I know I hurt you," she said, "but I'm ready to make things right. We can be a family. I can't do this alone." I looked at the baby, her baby, and then back at her. The audacity of her request was staggering. "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "You want me to forgive you for cheating, disappearing, and lying for 2 years, and now you want me to raise someone else's child? Are you out of your mind?" Her face crumpled, but I didn't care. She had no right to ask this of me, no right to come back and act like I owed her anything. "I think you should leave," I said firmly, standing up. She tried to plead with me, saying she had nowhere else to go, but I was done. I opened the door and motioned for her to leave. As she stepped outside, she turned back one last time. "Please," she whispered, "think about it." I shut the door without another word. After she left, I stood in the hallway for what felt like hours, trying to process everything. She was back after 2 years, with a baby that wasn't mine, asking for a second chance? It was like she had walked into my life with a wrecking ball, expecting me to rebuild the ruins she'd left behind. But I wasn't that person anymore. The next day, I got a text from her. "I understand you're angry, but I really need to talk to you. Please, let's meet." I ignored it. Over the next week, the messages kept coming. Some were apologetic, others defensive, and a few were downright manipulative. "I made a mistake, but we can fix this. You're being unfair. People make mistakes. Don't you think you owe it to me to at least try?" That last one hit a nerve. I owed her? After everything she'd done? The audacity was infuriating. When she showed up at my house unannounced a few days later, I realized I needed to put an end to this once and for all. I opened the door, blocking her from stepping inside. "What do you want?" I asked coldly. "I just want to talk," she said, holding the baby like a shield. "We've talked," I replied. "You've said your piece. I don't know what else there is to say." Her eyes welled up with tears, and for a brief moment, I felt a flicker of the old guilt she used to manipulate me with, but I pushed it aside. "You don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm alone. I don't have anyone else." "That's not my problem," I said bluntly. "You made your choices. You decided to cheat, to lie, and to leave. You don't get to come back now and act like I'm your safety net." She started to say something, but I held up my hand to stop her. "You didn't just hurt me," I continued. "You destroyed any trust one had in you. And the worst part is, you didn't even give me a chance to fight for our marriage. You took the easy way out, and now you want me to clean up your mess? No, I'm done." Her tears spilled over, but I didn't waver. "You need to figure out your own life," I said, "but I'm not going to be part of it. Whatever you're looking for, it's not here." For a moment, she just stood there, holding the baby and staring at me like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. Watching her leave for the second time felt different. There was no sadness, no regret, just a sense of finality. She sent one last text that night. "I hope you can forgive me someday. I'm sorry." I didn't respond. After her final text, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. She was gone for good this time, and so was the weight of everything she had put me through. It wasn't closure in the traditional sense, but it was enough. I threw myself into the life I had rebuilt over the past 2 years: work, friends, and the hobbies that had helped me rediscover myself. The difference now was that I wasn't looking over my shoulder, wondering if she'd show up again. The support of my friends and therapist was invaluable. They reminded me that I wasn't defined by her betrayal or the pain she caused. Slowly, I began to see myself not as the victim of her choices, but as someone who had survived them. One of the biggest lessons I learned was the importance of boundaries. Her return had tested me in ways I didn't think I could handle, but standing firm and saying no to her manipulation was one of the most empowering things I'd ever done. I also learned to stop blaming myself. For so long, I had carried the weight of our infertility diagnosis, thinking it was the reason she left. But the truth was, her decision had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with who she was. Over time, the pain and anger faded. They didn't disappear completely, but they stopped taking up so much space in my life. Instead of dwelling on the past, I started looking forward to the future. That future became even brighter when I met someone new. It wasn't planned. I wasn't actively looking for a relationship, but sometimes life has a funny way of surprising you. Her name was Sophie, and we met at a local charity event I'd volunteered for. She was kind, genuine, and had a warmth about her that drew me in immediately. Unlike my ex, Sophie wasn't interested in playing games or hiding behind walls. She was open and honest from the start, and it was refreshing in a way I hadn't realized I needed. When I told her about my past, she didn't judge or pity me. Instead, she said, "You've been through a lot, but it sounds like you've come out stronger. That's something to be proud of." Her words stayed with me. For the first time, I started to believe them. Sophie and I took things slow, building a foundation of trust and mutual respect. She met my friends, who immediately adored her, and we started carving out a life together that felt authentic and healthy. Looking back, I realized that my ex coming back wasn't just a test. It was a turning point. It forced me to confront the pain I'd been carrying and make a choice: to let it define me or to let it go. I chose to let it go. Life isn't perfect, but it's mine again. I'm no longer haunted by the past or weighed down by questions I'll never have answers to. And for the first time in years, I feel free. To anyone reading this who's been through something similar, healing takes time, but it's possible. You deserve peace, happiness, and a life that feels whole again. Here's to new beginnings and the strength to leave the past where it belongs.